Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to talk about the scary stuff. I'll talk about the stolen identities. I'll talk about dark web. And it's very weird when a person with a Russian accent telling you about the bad stuff, good news is that the accent is Russian. I'm not faking it, but I'm not from Russia. You are welcome to call me Russian if I'm allowed to call you Canadians. You laugh, I cry, it's all good. So the reason we're talking about identities is that the reason why it became so important is that because it actually has a value. It became a big deal for us over the past 20 to 30 years to actually care about our identities, electronic identities. When I think about the early days, just a couple years after I came to the United States, my identity was not very interesting. This is actually the artist's depiction of me back in 1991. The only difference is that I don't think I would be able to grow facial hair at the time. But my identity back then was really simplistic. Passport, driver's license, student ID, library card, Blockbuster card, pretty much some basic stuff about me, and almost none of it would be electronically accessible to me. The association with the word password, it would be more with the phrase open sesame than anything electronic, because my identity in 1991 was very boring, plain, and really nothing to steal electronically. Today, when I look at my identity, it's actually very vast. Because I've been working in IT for the past 25 years, I actually got a lot of electronic baggage. I got tons of email addresses from school to college to work, and I do quite a bit of consulting, so some companies give me email addresses to use. So that also goes into a whole bunch of online accounts that I created over the past 25 years. Anything starting from to play games, register applications, or do work or personal side. And then I also have tons of devices that carry my electronic identity. Some of them may be already outdated and sitting somewhere on a shelf. Maybe they were recycled. But quite a few devices over the years actually became part of my electronic footprint. And then when I'm looking in the future, my identity would be even more complex. It would be a collection of intertwined components, such as my social presence, my professional image, and additional information, my financial information, maybe all intertwined together. Today, when I look at my identity, I can't afford for my identity to be stolen. In 1991, I could, but in the future, I can imagine that everything that we do over past 10 years, what we did and what we will be doing in the future, also going to be part of this huge set of data. So we have tons and tons of data available about us, and we'll keep generating this. So as the data becomes available to us, there is interest in that data from the bad guys. The reasons are various, but as they actually go and look at our data, as they crawl the dark web and get into our systems, stealing tons of information, they have actually starting to amass tons and tons of data that they can use or they can monetize. So for example, stolen credentials from a person, they have really no value. There are billions of credentials out there in the dark web. My company actually in business of collecting and recovering stolen credentials, and so far we recovered 8 billion unique unencrypted sets of credentials. That's a lot. And overall, because of different breaches, we've seen 40 billion sets of credentials trafficked on the dark web one way or the other. And they're nearly free because you can only have to go out and get something that would match. If you're defending your identity, it's maybe easy to do. But if you are in business of defending identities of many, Well, guess what? These credentials will be a part of these type of data sets. And user ID and password are obviously on the way out, but other information may be also available. Facebook data, a single account goes just for $1. And in bulk, we've seen them as little as 2 cents per account. Social security numbers, only $3 a piece. And that's also extremely low or easy to get price. And that's kind of a scary thought that somebody can buy your social security number just for $3. You may not be targeted individually. Maybe the bad guys just trying to find somebody that they can target. And the targeting for social security number, for example, is not only for identity theft, it also can be by demographics. The hackers may be looking for affluent zip codes where people live, like 90210, or they would be looking for certain level of education or age of a person, because when you are 18, maybe your credit history, your identity does not have much of the weight, but when you're at prime of your career, you may have more identity to be stolen of. Your credit card information is only going for $5 to $15, and is also very little. It used to be, when I started looking at the dark web, the credit cards would be stolen just for a fraction of the available credit. So if a credit card had $2,000 worth of available credit, it would be sold for $200 for 10% of what is available. Now it's being sold for just a few dollars because we are getting better at detection, so hackers going by the value, not by the specific cards. Your background check information is only $12. Your credit report is $15. Your PayPal account may be only running $50 if it's accessible. Your medical records also $50 and more. Your bank account access, and I'm talking about the full access to your bank account information, is $100 only, regardless of how much money is sitting behind it. And then email access to certain components, also running around $250. Why it's so expensive? Well, it can be used to reset a lot of your passwords. It's currently being used for resetting and controlling quite a bit of your identity. That's as simple as it gets. This is what your identity is worth on the dark web. How simple is to steal your identity, how to sell your identity? Well, there is even the REST API available. So service called SSNDOB is actually offering an API access to steal your identity in bulk. The hackers no longer have to go and fill out the forms or anything like that. It can be a simple API call to the hacker's dark web location. You have to have a valid key that you have to always replenish to pay for the privilege to use, but this information is simply available as the dark web service. And in the corporate world, it's even worse. If we just take credentials, and credentials don't always mean just username and password. Sometimes it means additional access. Sometimes it requires 2FA, which hackers also can produce, and we'll cover how it's done. Your credentials, just a corporate email, starts at $50. Why? Well, because not every single corporate email would have anything interesting to hackers. It may be something extremely interesting to you, but not to the rest of the folks. Your internal or cloud applications, $200 minimum price, again, because there is so much data available. System administrator access to a single system runs at least $500 or more. Application administration is $1,000. And for network administration for large companies, we've seen prices as much as $500,000, but $10,000 seems to be beginning of bidding price. Your identity worth quite a bit more on the corporate side than on personal, yet I would argue that the damage done to you individually or to a corporate environment can be also similarly sized. So, as I share my identity across multiple devices, I always think about as my identity flows through a number of different components. And compromise of one of these components now means a potential compromise of others. As I get more cool devices inside my house, more chances of me actually being compromised over and over. It's not only insecure device, it's also misconfigured devices. And also, as more of these devices go into the cloud, They create vulnerabilities where if I don't manage them correctly, somebody else can do it for me. And on the internet, I have a lot of my identity to share. If it's only my email, no, it's now social media, professional profile, or recreational, financial, and also historical data. Historical data is available, and as we search more and more information, we find scary things. Here's an example. On the corporate side, we have a client which is a large hospital system in the state of Florida. And they had a couple of their corporate VIPs identities stolen in bulk. So when we investigated, we didn't find that hackers got into any specific systems. It just, we found out that the hackers actually got into the public interface of state of Florida, where they were holding the filings for acquisitions that that hospital bought another hospital. Wonderful state of Florida decided to put everybody on the board of directors of this hospital, including the home addresses, social security numbers, a whole bunch of other cool information into that filing. So the hackers found that information serviced by our own government and abused that information. That happened in 2004. And still, because a lot of these folks still were on the board or part of that hospital system, they still got compromised. So a lot of it is scary from my perspective. And when I look at one key solutions to manage my personal identity, well, I understand it's being made easy for multiple reasons. And my user experience is greatly being enhanced, but some of the inconveniences, some of the issues, some of the recoverability also creating quite a bit of discontent. And when we're talking about the mainstream applications, that's fine, but smaller applications, smaller solutions that I still want to use, sometimes they provide minimal support or do it yourself, or simply no interoperability. So now let's talk about the hackers' prerogative. Why are they targeting us? Some of them doing it for profit, some of them doing it for blackmail. Blackmail is on the rise right now because it's not requiring hackers to figure out how to monetize your data. They don't want to steal your data. They want to arrest the data away from you by encrypting it, or more often nowadays, they are trying to actually threaten you with data exposure or even regulatory risks. So they actually getting their money much faster, the crime cycle actually being minimized. Revenge is also a critical piece, and also tactical advantage for more sustained attacks. The hackers need one way in. They don't need to find every single vulnerability like your auditors would, or pen testers. They have to find one easy way. And we actually putting a lot of thoughts about our identity. We are creating lots of different ways to authenticate ourselves. But here's an interesting thing. Hackers are getting smarter. They're trying to figure out our defenses and how to exploit them. So we are all familiar with creating 2FA authentication through our phones. And in cases where we deal with Bitcoin exchanges and quite a few other organizations, we've seen hackers understanding that some of the organizations don't know much about their users. It's not like a bank that may ask you to come into a branch if you have some kind of authentication problems. Some places don't have an easy way to authenticate you, who you are. So they ask you to prove different things to them. We've seen a big streak of 2FA resets vulnerabilities because some Bitcoin exchanges, for example, just ask you to take a picture of yourself holding a valid ID with a piece of paper with today's date and the name of that Bitcoin exchange. Well, that's great. And there comes in Photoshop. We've seen hackers actually running these type of services in bulk, trying to Photoshop anything from clip art to professionally done images that actually take a professional to investigate and find out if that was an altered image. So there are ways to bypass certain things, and hackers were able to disconnect your second form of authentication from your device and assign it to theirs, and just go with resets of other information. Hackers are ingenious in doing this, and they are successful. Our corporate identity is also a challenge. Last week I was at a client site being asked to audit their second form of authentication in one of the most common platforms. They did a great job with onboarding and offboarding of all their employees, but they didn't do anything to manage onboarding and offboarding of their administrators. Their entire help desk set of users was not using the corporate AD authentication. They were using just that solution's authentication mechanism with a corporate email address and the password, and for some reason their personal phones as well. So we found out of about 50 help desk individuals, 8 of them no longer with the company with valid accounts, that nothing stopped them from authenticating to that and reassigning 2FA challenges. So challenges with onboarding, offboarding always exist, especially in the corporate environment, access controls, device management, intrusion detection. We see hackers targeting a lot of corporate targets because it's not as easy to get into a corporate environment, but then there is a bigger variety of targets. We talked about a huge amount of credentials, huge amount of vulnerabilities being out there. Sometimes hackers are targeting the entire environment randomly, or they're targeting entire internet. In case of 3 years ago, when the light rail system of San Francisco was compromised with ransomware, we know that it was not the Russians who did it, because the hackers used a Russian email address. It was actually students from Iran were scanning the internet, and the San Francisco light rail system had one vulnerability in their system, and also were misfortunate to have low IP address on the scan range that hackers were targeting. So in the way of doing this, hackers targeted the system, discovered vulnerabilities. They didn't care who they were until they realized that they could leverage something. Unfortunately, currently in the news, or just coming out of the news cycle, city of Baltimore, they were not targeted as city of Baltimore. They were not targeted by Russians or anybody with political agenda. They were targeted by one criminal from European Union who just scanned the internet and found the vulnerability on one of their servers. So this is the way we see a lot of exploitation. Yes, there are very directed attacks. There are specific takeovers. But hackers are allocating their resources very equivalently in their attacks and the ability of them actually break into systems. Who are the cyber criminals? They're the bad guys, but they don't really go by a standard image. They don't go by an image that we create in the movies or even in thoughts. They're everyday folks, and many of them are IT employees. Target was breached by a group of hackers, but the virus was written by a 24-year-old guy who looked for a job in the industry. He was actually, we found ads from him looking for $12 an hour job on freelancer.ru. He couldn't find a job for $12 an hour. He went to work for a hacker group and compromised Target. This is a reality that people in other countries, especially with lack of extradition laws with the United States or European Union, going into cybercrime because it's allowed by their culture, by their laws. Their goals, most of them, is monetization, but a lot of them are trying to make a statement. Even the big breaches that we talk about, like Russian government breaching Yahoo, was not as big as you think. There have been several breaches that really affected nearly entire Yahoo population. Russian government, when they breached the Yahoo infrastructure, they were only targeting a handful, couple dozen of email accounts of Russian citizens. And some of the goals that we are seeing are very specific, very targeted, and from the perspective of Russian government, well justified. They said, well, we serve Yahoo with subpoena. They didn't reply, so we went and did whatever we had to do. Unfortunately, it also sounds like government taking things in their hands, probably not for the right reason. But if you recall, several years ago, FBI and Apple were also at odds. We're in a very similar situation. Their tools, hackers' tools, are different. They are not well written, but they're effective. And the better they get written, more effective they get. So they invest into their tooling as much as needed for their crime cycle. And they are also trying to be evasive. They learning from us, and some of them working in our companies. They gathering that information about our defenses and selling that information to each other about ability to bypass these type of threats. So what should we do? We are obviously in the age where we have technology, individuals, and the regulations all aligned for defenses. But we don't always know what to defend. One of the big takeaways about defense against the bad guys is really to understand what you're trying to defend. Get your hands around it, define technologically, define it business-wise, and try to make sure that everything that you have is known to you. We see a lot of breaches happening because somebody forgot something, and that something sat around enough to be compromised. Understanding your enemies. It's not that everybody is targeting you particularly and your infrastructure. Certain hackers specialize in certain things, and you can define your defenses and you can deter them by making your infrastructure difficult to access using typical hacker tools. Risk versus rewards. Making sure that your defenses are scalable to the risk, and they are not bringing rewards to the hackers, but they bringing rewards to you and have measurable results for this. And also identifying a loss. In many cases, we see the losses of our data significantly over-exaggerated, because we can't define specific loss. If we can define specific loss, we have to assume total loss. We are looking at building new systems, new defenses that actually specifically segregate the data, separate the data. So if there is a loss, we can segregate that, we can define it, and we can improve. At the end of the day, protection of your identity, of your information, is a key that we're all working here forward to. It's an uphill battle, but with advances on the bad guy side, hopefully we can scale up and we can keep winning this fight. That's all for now. A couple minutes for questions.
Thank you for the presentation. What are some of the common tools or ways that hackers are using in today's world to steal information?
Sorry.
What are some of the common ways or tools that hackers are using in today's world?
They're actually using a variety of tools, but in many cases, they are actually borrowing our tools. One of the biggest botnets today, Emotet, is actually using our standard tools to compromise the systems. They're using open source tools that they're getting from GitHub to exploit our systems and move further. So it's hard to define the tools because very few of them are custom written. A lot of them are customized for crimeware. And more, what we are seeing in exploitation frameworks is the use of standard tools with very few modifications. Instead of testing something, they go one step further, exploiting it. Anything else? All right, 1 minute left. Thank you, guys.